I set this down on paper in the year of our Lord 1889, as the consumption takes what remains of my breath. Doc Haskell says, I won't see another full moon. So I write these words by lamplight, with hands that shake not from fear, but from the weight of truth long carried. The fever comes and goes like unwanted company. But in the moments of clarity, I feel compelled to leave this account, not for absolution, but for truth's sake. For 30 years I've ranched this hard stretch of Texas soil, 20 miles south of Fort Griffin. Folks called me a hermit, and I never corrected them. Solitude suited me after what happened at Yellow Creek. A man carries certain memories like stones in his pockets, the kind that pull you underwater, inch by inch, until breathing becomes a deliberate act. I built these walls not just of timber and stone, but of silence and regret. The ranch ain't much to look at. A weathered cabin, a small barn that leans like a drunk against the prevailing wind, a chicken coop, and a corral for the horses. But the land stretches far, scrub and mesquite punctuated by limestone outcroppings that catch fire with the setting sun. At night, coyotes sing to the stars, and sometimes I'd answer with my harmonica, playing tunes half-remembered from another life. It was December of '71 when she appeared. Dawn had barely broken the horizon, a thin silver-blue line cutting the darkness. I was checking the eastern fence line where coyotes had been getting at my calves. The wind that morning carried ice from the north, the kind that burns your lungs and makes your eyes water. I remember pulling my coat tighter, cursing the cold, when I saw her. At first I thought she was a deer or some wounded animal, but as I drew closer, I saw a woman huddled against my fence post, naked save for a torn camise, her body caked with dirt and scratches, as though she'd crawled through hell itself. Her hair was matted with blood and dust. She didn't look up as my boots crunched the frozen ground, just kept staring at nothing, tears cutting clean tracks down her filthy face. Ma'am, I called, but she flinched like I'd struck her. I removed my coat and approached slow, the way you would a spooked horse. I ain't gonna hurt you, I said, draping the coat over her shoulders. She didn't resist, but she didn't acknowledge me either. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the frost-covered ground. In that moment, with her huddled there, I felt something shift inside me, a door long closed creaking open. Not compassion exactly, but recognition. I knew what it was to be broken. I carried her back to my cabin. She weighed no more than a child, though I reckoned she was 30 or thereabouts. Her skin was ice cold, and I worried about frostbite on her bare feet. Once inside, I set her by the fire, gave her water, and found an old shirt and trousers that might fit. I turned my back while she dressed, though I doubt she would have cared. There was something vacant in her eyes, like she wasn't fully present in her body. That first day, she didn't speak, nor the second. I made a pallet for her near the hearth and slept with my back to the wall, my Winchester across my lap. Not that I feared her, but whatever had happened to bring a naked woman to my fence line in December couldn't be good. I talked some, mostly to fill the silence. Told her about the cattle, the weather, anything that came to mind. My voice sounded strange to my own ears after so many years of keeping silent company. I cleaned her wounds, shallow scratches mostly, but a deeper gash on her shoulder that I stitched as gently as I could. She didn't cry out, just watched me with those empty eyes that somehow still held a spark, buried deep like an ember in ashes. By the third day I needed supplies. Leaving her alone seemed wrong, but I had no choice. In town, Jeb at the general store gave me a peculiar look when I bought women's things, a dress, stockings, a hairbrush. Taking up sewing, Colton? He asked with a smirk. Gift for my cousin in Austin, I muttered, feeling the lie sit heavy on my tongue. Fort Griffin was hardly more than a trading post with pretensions. A general store, a saloon that doubled as a brothel, a smithy, and a handful of rough-hewn buildings clustered around a dirt street that turned to mud with the slightest rain. The fort itself stood on the hill above town, soldiers keeping watch over the frontier. That's when I first heard the whispers. A prisoner had escaped from a private transport headed to Huntsville, a woman accused of murder. The town was abuzz with it. Sheriff Blackwood had organized search parties. There was a reward. Killed her husband in his sleep, Jeb said, leaning close, his breath sour with tobacco. Cut his throat ear to ear with a kitchen knife. Then set their house ablaze to hide the evidence. My throat went dry. That's so. Caught her covered in blood. They did. Trial lasted 1 day. Judge Thornton sentenced her himself. Judge Thornton. Oh, the name landed like a stone in my gut. I hadn't heard it spoken in nearly 2 decades, but it carried the same weight as it had in Yellow Creek. $500 for information leading to her capture. Jeb continued, lowering his voice. Dead or alive, the poster says, though I reckon the judge would prefer her breathing. Why's that? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Public hanging, I expect.
Hey, make an example. Jeb tapped the side of his nose. Judge is particular about justice being seen. If you take my meaning.
I rode home faster than was wise on icy trails, my mind churning. The mountains to the west were already purple with early darkness, and clouds gathered on the horizon, promising snow. When I arrived, she was exactly where I'd left her, staring into the fire. I set the packages down and studied her face in the firelight. Was she capable of murder, of slitting a man's throat? Her hands were small, her wrists delicate, but I'd seen delicate things survive terrible circumstances. I'd seen sparrows weather storms that felled mighty oaks. That night, as the wind howled through the cracks in my cabin walls, she spoke her first word. Water. Her voice was rough, unused, like a rusty hinge. I brought her a cup and watched as she drank, her throat working with each swallow. Thank you, she whispered, handing the cup back. You got a name? I asked, settling onto my chair, careful to give her space. She looked at me then, really looked at me, her eyes suddenly sharp. I almost smiled. There was spirit there, buried under whatever horror she'd endured. Jeremiah Colton. She nodded slightly. Sarah. Just Sarah. Her eyes flashed with something, fear or anger. I couldn't tell. Just Sarah is enough. I didn't press. A person's past is their own business. Lord knows I'd want the same courtesy extended to me. We sat in silence as the fire popped and hissed, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Days passed. Sarah grew stronger. She began to help with chores, feeding chickens, mending clothes. We developed a rhythm, working mostly in silence. I noticed her watching the horizon, scanning the distance whenever we stepped outside, waiting for something or someone. A week after she arrived, the first snow fell, fat, lazy flakes that muffled the world in white silence. Sarah stood on the porch, her borrowed dress fluttering in the breeze, and lifted her face to the sky. For a moment, she looked almost peaceful. Beautiful, she murmured. Yes, I agreed, though I wasn't looking at the snow. Then, Fletcher showed up, a mean-spirited man who ranched the next property over. He'd never been friendly, but we'd kept to ourselves, respecting the unwritten law of the frontier. Mind your own business, and expect others to do the same. He rode up one morning as I was chopping wood. His gelding was lathered despite the cold, suggesting he'd ridden hard. Fletcher himself sat stiff in the saddle, his face pinched and sour beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Colton, he said, by way of greeting. I leaned on my axe. Fletcher. He claimed he was looking for a stray bull, but his eyes kept drifting to my cabin door. I could feel the weight of his suspicion, like a physical thing. Heard you might have company, Colton, he said, not bothering to dismount. Just me and my shadow. That's so, because Thornton's boy was in town yesterday, talking about a woman fitting a certain description. My hand instinctively moved closer to my holster. Don't know what you're talking about, Fletcher. He spat tobacco juice at my boots. Judge'll pay good money for information. $500, I heard. Then you best get to finding some information worth selling. His eyes narrowed. I saw smoke from your chimney when I was up on the ridge. More smoke than a man living alone would need. Cold snap, I said evenly. Been keeping the fire hot. He didn't believe me, that was plain enough. But he had no cause to push further. Not yet. I'll be seeing you, Colton, he said, as he turned his horse. Might bring the sheriff next time. for a social call. After he left, I found Sarah hiding under my bed, shaking like an aspen leaf. "It's him," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "One of them." "Fletcher?" I asked, surprised. "You know him?" She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "He was there that night." That night, she told me her story, not all at once, but in broken pieces, like shards of a mirror. When assembled, reflected a horror I could scarcely comprehend. We sat before the fire, a bottle of whiskey between us. She took small sips, wincing at the burn, but seeming to draw strength from it. Sarah had been married to a farmer near Austin. They had a small spread, nothing fancy. Her husband died of fever 3 years back. With debts mounting, she took work as a housekeeper for Judge Thornton, the most powerful man in the county. "His son William took a liking to me," she said, her voice hollow. "Wouldn't leave me be. I told the judge, but he just laughed, said I should be flattered." One night, William cornered her in the pantry. When she fought back, he grew violent. She escaped, but only just. I quit the next day, thought that would be the end of it. She fell silent, staring into her cup. The firelight played across her face, highlighting the fading bruises and the determined set of her jaw. But William Thornton wasn't accustomed to being denied. He and 2 friends, Fletcher being one, rode to her farm one night. What they did to her, she wouldn't say directly. But I understood. I've seen war. I know the depths to which men can sink. Afterward, William said if I told anyone, they'd say I invited them, that a widow woman living alone must be desperate for company. She fell silent then, staring at her hands, which had begun to tremble. "That's not the end of it," I said softly. She shook her head. 2 nights later, William came back alone, said he couldn't stop thinking about me. Her voice caught. I had my husband's old knife under my pillow. I warned him to stay back. I nodded, understanding what came next without her having to say it. The judge found me standing over his son. He didn't even ask what happened, just had me arrested. At the trial, Fletcher and the other man testified that I'd been entertaining men for money, that I killed William in a dispute over payment. The pieces fit together now. The escaped prisoner, the reward, the fear in her eyes whenever hoofbeats approached my cabin. "You believe me?" she asked, searching my face. "I do." And I did. Not just because of the terror in her eyes when Fletcher appeared, or the way she flinched at sudden movements. I believed her because 20 years earlier, I'd witnessed Judge Thornton's particular brand of justice firsthand. I was barely 25 when I settled in Yellow Creek, a small mining town now long abandoned. I'd saved enough from cattle drives to buy a small stake in a silver mine. The future seemed bright. I even courted a young woman named Rebecca. She was the school teacher, educated, refined, but with a spirit that matched the wildness of the frontier. Her laugh could make flowers grow in winter. The Thorntons owned most of the businesses in town, including the assay office. When rumors spread that they were cheating miners out of their rightful shares, a group of us demanded an investigation. Judge Thornton, already powerful then, had the complaint dismissed. No evidence of wrongdoing, he declared from his bench, though we all knew he'd never looked for any. One night, the assay office burned down, along with all its records. The judge blamed the miners who had complained. A posse was formed. 3 men were hanged without trial, their bodies left swinging as a warning. I knew they were innocent. I knew because I had seen William Thornton and his friends near the office shortly before the fire started. But I said nothing, did nothing. Fear sealed my lips and shame drove me from Yellow Creek. Rebecca begged me to speak up, to fight for justice. When I refused, she called me a coward. She was right. I packed my belongings that night and rode out before dawn, left everything behind. My claim, my future, my heart. For 20 years, I'd carried that silence like a stone in my chest, growing heavier with each passing season. I never told Sarah this story. Some confessions come too late to matter. But as January turned to February, and search parties combed the countryside, I made a decision I should have made 20 years earlier. I would not be silent again. Word came that Judge Thornton himself was coming to oversee the search. Fletcher rode by twice more, watching my place with hungry eyes. I knew time was running short. One evening, as snow began to fall, Sarah and I sat on the porch despite the cold. The world was quiet, muffled by snow and gathering darkness. She had gained weight, her face filling out, though shadows still lurked in her eyes. She touched my hand, the first time she had initiated contact. Her fingers were rough from work, but warm against mine. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. I looked into her eyes, no longer vacant but clear and questioning, because sometimes a man gets a second chance to do what's right. She studied my face for a long moment. "You're a good man, Jeremiah Colton." I shook my head. "No, but I'm trying to be." That night, she slept in my bed for the first time. Not for passion. Neither of us was ready for that, but for comfort, for the simple human need to feel another heart beating nearby. I held her as she slept, her head on my chest, and watched the shadows dance across the ceiling. The next morning they came, Fletcher, the sheriff, and 5 other men, including Judge Thornton himself, older now, his hair gone silver, but still straight-backed and imperious on his black stallion. The morning sun glinted off their badges and gun barrels. I stood on my porch, rifle in hand. As they approached, Sarah was inside, but I knew she was watching through the window. "Step aside, Colton," Sheriff Blackwood called. "We have reason to believe you're harboring a fugitive." "No fugitive here," I replied. "Just a guest." The judge nudged his horse forward. His face was deeply lined, but his eyes were as cold and calculating as I remembered from Yellow Creek. "Your guest is a murderess who killed my son. Hand her over, and we'll forget your part in this foolishness. Your son died by his own actions, Judge, same as those miners you hanged at Yellow Creek." His eyes narrowed. "You're making dangerous accusations, Colton." "Not accusations. Testimony. I saw Williams set that fire. I watched him laugh as those innocent men died." A murmur ran through the posse. The judge's face darkened. "You're lying to protect a whore and a killer." "I'm speaking truth I should have spoken decades ago." That's when Sarah stepped onto the porch beside me. She wore the dress I'd bought her, her hair neatly braided. She looked at the judge without flinching. "I didn't murder your son," she said clearly. "I defended myself against a rapist." Fletcher spat. "Lying bitch." "You were there," she said, looking directly at him. "You and Harris both. You held me down while he—" "Enough," the judge roared. "Sheriff, arrest them both." What happened next still plays in my mind like a nightmare in slow motion. Fletcher drew his pistol. I raised my rifle. The sheriff shouted. Guns flashed in the winter light. I felt the bullet hit my shoulder before I heard the report. A hot punch followed by spreading warmth. I staggered but didn't fall. My own shot caught Fletcher square in the chest. He tumbled from his horse, dead before he hit the ground, his blood staining the snow crimson. Then Sarah screamed. One of the posse had circled behind the cabin. He grabbed her, pressing a knife to her throat. I recognized him then. Harris, the third man from her story. "Drop the rifle, Colton," the judge commanded. I had no choice. As my weapon hit the dirt, the judge dismounted, drawing his own pistol. "You've sealed your fate," he said coldly. "Harboring a fugitive, killing a deputy. You'll hang before sunset." "Not before the truth is known," came a new voice. We all turned to see 3 riders approaching from the east. I recognized Doc Haskell from town, alongside the editor of the county newspaper, and most surprisingly, Rebecca, my lost love from Yellow Creek, now gray-haired but unmistakable. The years had been kind to her. She sat tall in the saddle, her back straight, her gaze direct. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" the judge demanded. Rebecca dismounted, clutching a leather portfolio. "Evidence, Your Honor. Letters from your son to his friends, including Mr. Fletcher there, boasting of their entertainments with unwilling women, and an eyewitness account of the fire at Yellow Creek, signed and notarized." The judge's face went purple. "Lies and forgeries." The governor doesn't think so, said the newspaper editor. These documents have already been dispatched to Austin, along with sworn statements from other victims too frightened to speak until now. I felt lightheaded, partly from blood loss, partly from shock. Rebecca had done what I had failed to do. She had gathered evidence, built a case, sought justice. The man holding Sarah suddenly looked uncertain.
Parson, the sheriff, stepped forward, holstering his weapon.
Judge Thornton, he said quietly, I think we need to sort this out properly. In town. What followed were the most extraordinary months of my otherwise unremarkable life. The judge was arrested. Fletcher's death ruled self-defense. Sarah's conviction overturned. More women came forward with similar stories of abuse at the hands of William Thornton and his friends. Doc Haskell tended my wound, which festered before it healed, leaving a puckered scar that aches when rain is coming. During my recovery, I learned that Rebecca had been tracking the Thorntons for years, collecting evidence, building a case. She had married a lawyer in Austin, had children, grandchildren now. She visited me once as I recovered. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset, paint the hills gold. You found your courage finally, she said, not unkindly. Too late, I replied. She shook her head, silver strands catching the light. It's never too late to do right, Jeremiah. I wanted to ask her forgiveness, but the words stuck in my throat. She seemed to understand anyway, reaching over to pat my hand. We were young, she said softly. We all make choices we regret. After she left, I found Sarah sitting by the fire, mending one of my shirts. She looked up as I entered. She still loves you, she said. I shook my head. That was a lifetime ago. Sarah stayed through my recovery, through the trials, through the spring planting. We never spoke of her leaving, and eventually I stopped expecting her to go. We were two broken people who had somehow found each other in the vast emptiness of the frontier. We married in the summer of '72, a quiet ceremony with just the preacher and Doc Haskell as witness. It wasn't love, not at first. It was something else. Understanding, perhaps. Respect, certainly. We had both survived things that should have destroyed us. In time, though, something tender grew in the spaces between our scars. We expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. Sarah planted a garden that flourished under her care. Tomatoes, beans, herbs that scented the air when the wind blew just right. She took in strays, a three-legged dog, a blind cat, a half-wild Mustang that no one else could ride. Nights, we'd sit on the porch and watch the stars, wheel overhead. Sometimes she'd sing softly, old hymns her mother had taught her. Sometimes I'd tell stories of my younger days driving cattle up to Kansas. We built a life that, if not always happy, was honest and true. We had 17 good years together, no children. Sarah's injuries at the hands of those men had seen to that, but we made our own family of sorts. Folks stopped calling me a hermit, started calling on us when they needed help or company. Sarah took to midwifery, having a natural gift for easing pain and calming fears. I expanded the herd, bought more land. We weren't rich, but we had enough, more than enough. She died last winter, pneumonia taking her quickly, despite Doc Haskell's best efforts. As she faded, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "We saved each other, Jeremiah." I buried her on the hill overlooking the valley, where wildflowers bloom in spring. Carved her headstone myself from limestone, quarried on our land. Simple, like she would have wanted. Sarah Colton, beloved. Now as I face my own end, I set down this confession, not of crimes but of cowardice. Overcome too late, of redemption found in the most unexpected places, of a silent woman who appeared at my fence line and taught me that even the most damaged souls can find peace. The wind is rising outside. Soon another winter will grip this land. I hear Sarah in that wind sometimes, her voice no longer silent, and I am no longer afraid. My strength fades with the light. Doc says the end will be peaceful. But what does he know of peace? True peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's finding meaning within it. Sarah taught me that. I leave this ranch to Rebecca's grandson, who has shown interest in cattle and has his grandmother's kind eyes. I leave this confession to whoever finds it, with the hope that my story might remind them it is never too late to stand for what's right. The lamp gutters. My hand can barely hold the pen, but my heart is light, lighter than it's been in 50 years. I'm coming home, Sarah. I'm coming home.